So hello, welcome to episode 3 of the On The Knuckle podcast. I'm Gaz and Beggsy, joined as always on the other side of the world, Mr. Adam Beggsy. How is it going?
Going good tonight, Gaz, or night for me tonight, but daytime for you. Getting to the tail end of our season over here. We've just come off a good couple of weeks of stomping grounds with everyone coming through the pipe and the jumps. Life's good.
And we're going to cover the little stomping ground stuff in a future episode as well, because you've been in prime position for it. The rest of us have to watch via Instagram. You get to pop up and throw yourself on the knuckle and see everything live and firsthand. So definitely perks of the location.
Yeah, it's been good to get back into the swing of things and see everyone and watch everyone's season preparation starting on such a big year.
Yeah, and obviously if we get into the tail end of your season, we're about to get into our season, which means intense travel, lots of pressure, lots of stress, but some good trips ahead of us.
Yeah, it certainly feels like that. It's just got that, end of season here, but everything's about to fire up and go.
Which is exciting. But before we get to next season, obviously, if you've listened to episodes 1 and 2, you'll know we're kind of recapping last year's season just to get into the swing of things as we kind of figure out how the podcast works. We talked about Big Air in episode 2, and today is the day for Slopestyle. Slopestyle is my favorite. It just seems like it's got a bit of everything. I know you're a big half-pipe guy, but, you got the extra years and that generational side. So let's hit the jingle and we'll get straight into Slopestyle. All right, so looking into, we had a pretty good slopestyle season last year, which I always forget that it starts way back in New Zealand, way back in August 2024, and then goes all the way through to March. So it's a pretty long season. Had some weather-affected comps, which is kind of what you come to expect with snowboarding, but we survived. We've got a few little kind of backup plans as we go into those sort of contests, and the whole level of slope riding I felt really picked up a notch, partly from the way the courses were designed, but then also the level of riding coming through, what we'd seen kind of thrown into slopestyle runs was a little bit different from the norm. And obviously last season we were building up to the World Championships, which happened in St. Moritz at the end of the season, which again, future podcast episode. But also when we were in New Zealand last year was the kickoff for the Olympic qualification period for big air, slope and pipe. And obviously, we're still in that period. We're building up to the Milano 2026 Winter Olympics, where Mr. Adam Begg will be our head judge under the spotlight from the entire world. But Beggsy, do you want to talk us through how the slopestyle kind of works with the judging side of things and obviously the format that we use at the World?
Yeah, sure. So with Slopestyle, we've been doing section by section for a little while now. It's something we're constantly refining as far as judging goes. We're always trying to make it better, clearer for what the athletes see, and just trying to make it so it's understandable for the audience. And I think that's the main idea behind this format. Every section's its own competition. You've got rail sections, jump sections. And so the way we do it is usually we have 2 judges on the first 2 section, 2 on the second 2, 2 on the third 2, and then 3 as composition. And the way we've sort of started to get into it, we really narrow in on training. We watch it super closely. Every judge kind of breaks out into their own little section and they just start to analyze tricks and take them apart and sort of say, what's the best rail trick we're going to see on this section? Or what's the best jump trick we're going to see on that section? And then once we've got that range, we start to try and slot all the tricks in for the week. And it seems to be working pretty well. We try and leave a bit of space at the top for those MBDs or the rare tricks or those outliers. There's sort of a clump in the middle where the majority is, and then, a drop away to those sort of poorer or average trips or weaker execution. So it's quite clear that for an athlete, when they get to a section and there's a lower score, they can sort of see where they need to improve throughout their run. And that's the section part done. And then composition, I'll let you talk to that since you are composition judge for the Olympics.
Yeah, so that composition, the beauty of this system for me is like the athletes, as you say, get to see all the information rather than just getting like the 73 on the screen. They get to see it was a 73 and section 3 was weak, so that's what I need to improve if I want to improve the score. So it's like real-time feedback. But the composition guys, which I formed one of the 3 judges for multiple events last season, and I guess the Olympics as well. We look at the entire course, top to bottom. We're less focused on the difficulty of all the tricks, but actually focused on the whole run the variety, kind of how the tricks actually link together. So whether they are showing different axes, different grabs, different directions, different types of slides. So we take all that into account, and it is, to put it nicely, it's a bit of a brain fuck trying to switch your head away from that traditional OI, overall impression side of things, into composition. But I definitely think last season was when we went kind of a leap forward in composition compared to how we've done it in previous years. As you say, yeah, it's a constant learning curve for section by section. It's tricky to head judge because of the amount of maths involved. It's tricky to be a scoring judge because of the amount of maths involved. But I love it because it means that the rail tricks fully get counted equally to the jump tricks, which in overall impression, you can kind of get lost with, and you get that last jump syndrome and forget that the first two rail tricks are a bit off, whereas everything gets taken into account, accounted for. Good England, as always. So yeah, so it's a very cool system. It started off at the US Open 10 years ago, I want to say, maybe even a little bit longer.
It's been around for a while, and it's just been a refinement, I think.
Yeah, but we're getting to grips with it, which everyone will be pleased to hear, seeing as we're going to use it at the Olympics in 5 months' time, is it? We're up to on the countdown?
Yeah, it's coming up quick.
Coming up far too quick, to be honest. But all right, so I'll put my cup of tea down. Beggsy, do you want to kick us into the start of last season?
Yeah, so like you said, it feels years ago now, but it was back in New Zealand. It basically set the tone for us of, this new Olympic run-in. It was the qualifying for the athletes, but for us judges, we kind of flipped how we do it a little bit. We sort of stepped up the level of professionalism. It was the first time we'd started doing our own night training. Those groups that I was talking about on the sections, they continued that at night. We'd sort of film all the training on our phones and then, debate tricks and have a look at stuff and really try and hone in those sections. And get that teamwork working so that in the moment when we've only got 20 to 40 seconds to throw out a score, those judges were kind of working in sync, and there was no real surprises on tricks we saw. Any differences of opinion or clashes between personalities were, they had in the lounge room floor and the night before, where we could sort of talk about it without any pressure. It's a real pressure cooker inside the booths. You want to save that brain space for getting the scores right, not sort of having differences of opinion or I guess adding extra pressure to the situation. So yeah, that really set the tone for us.
Nighttime sessions are like a snowboard nerd's dream because we're spending 4 or 5 hours a night just going through trick for trick, replaying them on the screen. There's people standing up and imitating the tricks and arguing why front 2-2 is harder than cab 2-2 or something similar to that. So if you're into snowboard nerdiness, then come along to a judge's night session at a World Cup. Or become a judge, and then clinic. You get to be, come to the clinic's probably the starting point. But I think that stepped up our professionalism so much. Our kind of approach is the riders are getting more professional, they're getting better. We kind of need to sync up and match. I really enjoy those kind of sessions. You get fully into the zone, and doing it like the night before qualifications means everything's fresh. We've gone through all the topics. We're all dialed in, ready to go. So that's one thing that we'll keep going forward through with this season, and we'll probably bring you some snippets of sneaky information in some way or form throughout the podcast season as well. Season.
So that was the one I think it set the tone for us how we were going to work. The course was really good. There was an aero with the cannon rail that we really saw some big tricks on. We sort of started to have the discussion with riders about hand drags on rails and how that looked.
Yeah, because I guess they started the hand drags on rails kind of started from Dusty in Mammoth a couple of years ago. Started doing this layback hand drag over the rainbow rail. And then it got scored well because it's not something we see all the time. So now there's been more imitations and more variabilities on them. So it was an interesting discussion with the riders as to how to reward it. Because is it kind of cheating through a rail section and doing an air trick on a rail section? Or is it just showing good variety into that bag of rail tricks?
Yeah. And I think we're still on the same page with, if it's a proper, your hands actually sliding the whole rail and, it's the rail slide. It's considered difficult. We all agreed on that, and there's a lot of riders that were doing faux ones, and they'd do that trick we watched for days of training, and only nail it a couple of times, which really showed to the difficulty of actually getting that trick right. So,
can you remember what Tiger Hasegawa's trick was that he was trying in training? I can't remember if he ever pulled it out in the New Zealand comp, but it was something like cab 5 Miller flip 2 out.
Yeah. I think it was like an 8 over it, but it was with a Miller in the middle and with a little tap on the, sort of got back onto the rail at the end. But Yeah, it was a pretty special one.
Overall, decent course, good options for variety with the transition elements on section 5, if I remember correctly, having those kind of quarter pipe Wu-Tang features. And then, I should say, decent rails, street section at the top, bit of a mishmash in the middle with the rainbow, and then the shootout spin to win option. So gave a lot of opportunities for the riders. But as I interrupted you beforehand, what is New Zealand famous for?
It's famous for the weather, the land of the long white cloud, and unfortunately got a bit of wind and weather for this one. So I think it resulted in the finals being cancelled, was it? And we ended up getting results off men's double up, which I've always been outspoken about not being a fan of double up.
Do you want to take us through what double up is?
Yeah, so basically all those
sucks?
judges that we have 4 sections end up getting split into 2 panels, and we have 2 panels of 4 essentially judging at the same time, so we can rip the riders through and get a run before the weather gets there. But it's fast paced. As one rider finishes dropping that panel scoring, the next panel's on course and they're scoring, and we kind of alternate like that. We do watch the first 5 or 10 riders together because the way it's seeded, we get to sort of set a range and try and keep the 2 heats together. But no matter how well you try and do that, once the comp sort of starts to develop, those 2 heats essentially break up. So we're still trying to mash them, but we're running 2 comps at the same time with 2 different panels. So it's always a bit compromised when it comes to results.
Yeah, because the difficulty is with the results, they get mashed based on points rather than it being first, second, third. It's just 90s, 85, 80, etc. So you can, in theory, have an overall result from just one heat if that's a higher scoring heat, which could be correct depending on which riders and how the runs go, but it could be a bit skewed because you are effectively judging 2 different comps for 2 different panels, but then comparing.
Yeah, and unfortunately you don't know because you haven't seen the whole comp. So half the time you've only seen your guys. So while you think your one might be the best, you haven't actually seen the other one. So it's an interesting one.
Yeah, and that's why 10 judges for section by section, including the head judge, get split into a head judge, 2 panels of 4, and 1 kind of floater, which for some reason ends up to be me.
It was you at that one.
And that was one of those ones. As that floater, you're trying to keep track of both different panels and kind of be like, all right, cool. They had a similar run. They were in the early 70s for that one. Does that match up? Cool. Then you go in the early 70s. No, that run should be better on paper. Then we drop it down. So it's a lot more thinking, talking. And again, as the head judge, you kind of got no clue what's really happening until right at the end when it all merges together.
Yeah, it's a brain fry as a head judge. And the other thing with that is it's unlike a big air or a slope, you don't drop high and low. We don't have enough numbers to do that. So every score counts, which, again, isn't ideal.
Yeah, and you need to balance. It's just, ideally, we'd never use it. And I think in New Zealand, I remember the contest director saying there's a 1% chance of us actually going to double up. He was very pushing for section by section, and just the weather was that 1% chance.
Yeah, which we managed to do. In the women's, we went section by section. We held our ground and, we actually got a result how we wanted to. That was good.
So going into the women's, we had, if I'm reading my little notes correctly, we had Kokma Miraze in first place, Mia Brooks in second, Rebecca Flynn in third, which seemed like was pretty bog standard, I would say. Kind of like there was no issues at the podium end of it. With the weather, it was very much a survival of the fittest. We saw the level of difficulty just drop down and just people trying to get runs on the board.
Yeah, I think Rebecca did a good 7 on one of the jumps. Zoe was a standout, in qualies to, I don't know. That was, I guess, the controversial one from New Zealand. Zoe's qualification. She had a really good run and won. I think she got first or second in nearly every section. She might have won 4 sections and got second in 1, and then crashed sat down a back double 10 on the bottom.
Yeah.
And it was a massive back double 10. A lot of the other girls were only doing 360s and 540s. And so the level of the jump was there. And I think she got like a 28 or a 30 from memory. That's still a crash score, but it's better than your 15 or 20s that were the crashed 3s and 5s. So it sort of had that separation that it needed from a 540, but it was actually enough to squeak her into the finals. And I think that's where section by section comes out. She literally won every other section. So, the switchback 5 was beautiful. Switchback 9, sorry, it was beautiful. She did enough at the top of the course to, I guess, get it done. Yeah,
because if we go back into the math side of things, you lace the first 5 sections, you get scores in the 9s for every single section. Your base score before you even get to section 6 is going to be 45 and above. So that's already going to be higher than all those crash runs that we saw. So that was definitely the interesting talking point. If I seem to remember, I think we cancelled finals and took results from qualification. So Zoe sneaking in 8th place into finals meant she finished 8th overall. And there was definitely some discussions with riders. But at the end of the day, it's kind of that interesting judge philosophy that other riders landed all 6 tricks but had small instabilities or washy bits of execution. Zoe was perfect on 5 and then had one bigger instability, and like, kind of where is that balancing point as we go through? And that's just, you almost have to say that case by case. There's no specific maths example as to how it would actually work out.
And at the end of the day, we're talking 8th place on that one. So I almost stand by what the guys put on paper on that one. Like, it's, you look at it and a 28 or a 30, like it's not bad for it's not a great score. It's still a crash score. I mean, I think after that, we've decided we go a little harder on them and we just compress that range at the bottom, same as we try and spread it out a bit at the top. Yeah, it was definitely a talking point from that one for a few of us.
Yeah, good start of the season with a nice discussion.
Yeah.
Because, that was one thing with our composition scale for that one. I remember we got a bit compressed with the first, like we set our anchor score a little bit low, and then we didn't have that space to reward. So again, ranking was correct on our side, but the actual spread of the range was the big impact, or lack of spread of the range, should we say.
Yeah, that was a good point, because, we learned a lot from that. It's just, every point counts in section by section. If composition doesn't use it or one section doesn't use it, suddenly we end up with lower scores. So it was a good talking and learning point.
And we'll probably keep talking about the maths of section by section as we go through this episode, because it's a regular pop-up, and it is one of those. We had to tweak it like competition by competition. So stay with us throughout the various maths chat.
Yeah, I was going to say the other thing from that one, the talking point was, which we weren't aware of in the booth, because we were well and truly under the clock at that one. We were trying to get the last people dropped before dark, but they didn't actually reshape the course between runs. So conditions were horrendous. And, as the light faded, it just got really hard to put down runs. So the takeoffs were baked by the sun. There was no speed for the bottom jump. Like, it was really tough conditions. So, that was unfortunate that we didn't, or that the course wasn't maintained for him in between runs. I think we might have seen a few more runs put down.
Yeah, and it was definitely an example of like those that can ride in the bad conditions would excel. Like, if we go to the men's, like those Kiwi kids that used to ride in Cadrona in whatever weather it throws up, and you had 3 New Zealanders in the top 6 in the men's. So kind of showcases just how used to that kind of format out. But into the men's, we had Cam Spalding, Canadian, as our winner. Mons Royston from Norway in second, and then Rocco Jameson, which I believe was his first career, definitely his first slopestyle podium, but I think it's his first career World Cup podium just before he got the one in Kur, about a month or so later on in the Big Air.
Yeah, he kind of came out swinging that season, didn't he? It was sort of like, really, he was one to watch in warm-ups. He had that double sloth roll pullback, and, the way he was riding in training, he was every run through the course. He was one that was a focus, and then he backed it up. Like you said, he backed it up in the comp.
And that, like, battle for top spot between Cam and Mons, that goes back to that was from double up. So Mons won heat 1, Cameron won heat 2, and that was one of those conversations when Cam's score was going in, or Mons' score was going in, because I think his was second run. We had to have that conversation, like, we were aware that we might not get finals done, so we had to have that conversation, pause for a second to be like, is Mons' run better than Cam's? No, then we're kind of capped at what score we can actually give, even though he was winning that heat. So it's that extra presence of mind we kind of needed in the day. So a little pat on the back to our head judge, Mr. Adam Begg, for that one. Well managed.
And memorable one for me was Mons' run in that one, actually. He's had that really good front 2 cork 4 off, and, front double roadie on the bottom jump. So, yeah, there was a couple of them. It was good after a summer to come out and see the first comp of the season and watch them all come out swinging.
Yeah, that was... Like, it's kind of nice to get back into it, because you never entirely know what everyone's done over that summer training break. And then this was kind of the first glimpse of, all right, like the double sloth roll coming out. I'm like, cool, this is what we've got to deal with. But yeah, he was definitely, I think, one of our ones to watch for the season, just because it wasn't going to be something standard that he was bringing out. Can you remember Cam's run off the top of your head? That's a long time ago. And we have the disadvantage that it was OI rather than section by section for that one. But if I remember kind of correctly, I think it had that front 14 in that he had all season. Probably the back 16. They were kind of his 2 slopestyle jump tricks, but I think it was just top to bottom, good execution, especially in those weather conditions. So it pulled out for him. All right, we reckon that's a pretty good wrap on New Zealand.
Yeah, I think let's hit Laax.
Sweet. Laax is it's everyone's kind of favorite event of the season. Do you want to talk us? Take us through Laax a little bit in terms of the course and why Laax is so awesome.
It's the home of freestyle snowboarding in Europe. Pretty much, it's just a cracking course, and it's always that little bit more creative. There's something in there that's different. It's not just your stock slopestyle course, and so from that, it's always a good one for competition. The production value, we've got the cable cam. There's semis, which, it's written into their system that they always have semis. So, you get that cut to 24, then another cut again. So everyone kind of gets a second shot at it, which again helps the standard of riding. Everything, all those little things that kind of add up to being a great comp. Good VIP lounge, like it's just the whole atmosphere up there. It is just really nice, and they get a decent crowd too. Up on the hill, there's that spot where you can see the whole course. So it's one of the biggest spectator events of the season too.
Yeah, it actually feels like a top tier event, which is sick. But you're getting little invites to the VIP lounge nowadays.
Sometimes
never comes my way. Yeah, like Laax is always a sick course, and the bit I really liked about the course this year was it wasn't money Buddha, money Buddha, money Buddha. It was like kind of jump on the smaller end of the kind of the World Cup jumps, then into kind of those twisted sister sort of jumps, and then into quarter pipe transition jump, and then into another quarter pipe. So it really challenged the transitional aspects of the riders and kind of pulled the standard of tricks down, but in a nice way. Like we weren't seeing 18s, 19s, 21s. It was back to 12s and 14s, and then execution really starts to come into play.
Yeah, totally. And then I think that was good too. Like we got to see a bunch of people really have a crack to like qualies. We saw Liam dominating with he had sort of high level rails as he always does, but then all four directions on the jump. I think he was the only person to go cab 14 on his section in qualies. So, he came out straight away and put down the top run. Rocco had some good rails. It was already the guys from New Zealand, Cam, Rocco, Liam, all sort of starting to streak ahead in qualies. And then, do you have anything from qualies or duck into semis?
I think duck into semis. I think the key thing you said is that we get to run a semis in Laax, because at a World Cup we're taking 60 men, cutting down to between 10 and 16 for finals, depending on how the organisers want to do it with the TV rights. So actually being able to do a semis just makes for a much fairer cut into finals rather than taking the top 10% or 6% through. I don't know if my math is correct on that one, but yeah, you get the idea. So having semis is awesome because it brings those two heats back into one heat, and then we then play again for spots in the final.
Yeah, I think Truth was really unlucky for that. He was standing out in qualies and then just missed semis. Probably should have been there. Had a sick run with a double crippler, good amplitude on his 5 in the pipe. Like he was massive on the quarter pipe down the bottom. And then he went, board slide pretz 2 on the last rail, which is, in that course, by the time people get to the bottom, their legs are cooked. They're really just trying to hang on, and we're not seeing sort of high consequence tricks. They're just like, I've slammed my run. I've just got to get to the finish. I've just got to get to the finish. And they put down a run. So to drop a pretz on that, I think, it probably slipped through the cracks. I think he was very unlucky not to get to semis with the run that he did.
He quite often seems to be the bridesmaid rather than the bride. Always seems to be into those bubble spots of first one out or so. But it's an interesting point about finishing on the rails, because it does just seem to be like survival mode. We'll just do 50 front 3 or back blunt 2 or just a trick through. We'll land it cleanly. You never see the same kind of level rail trick you would in the kind of the first 2 or 3 sections, depending on the course. So I kind of dislike that part, in that it ends on a rail section. Just feels like a bit of an anticlimactic end to a run, rather than that kind of traditional Muddy Buddha, Stompy triple, right away clean. But going back to that quarter pipe as well is a bit of a decisive feature, because if you can't ride transition, then you're already kind of losing out on 7 or 8 points in the overall scheme of things because you haven't got a quarter pipe trick in there.
Yeah, totally. I think, well, saying that though, that rail, finishing on a rail, it can be a separator for some, and if it can be a real chance to drive the knife in and finish it off for some of those good riders that just really continue all the way to the bottom. So yeah, it has its moments.
Yeah, peaks and troughs.
Yeah,
but like in semis,
Dane was good in semis. Yeah, he was one of the ones to look at.
Yeah, gap front 2 out on the last rail, which go back to that kind of consequences. Like you mess that trick up and then you've messed up your entire run. It's something else. Who else we have? Yeah, Su Yiming, second in semis, Eli Bouchard, which probably his best slope riding we've kind of seen in that semis, I think. Well, at that point, obviously, it then improved later on. Spoiler alert.
Yeah. He had some good radios and stuff too, and that just speaks to Laax, you know. Su Ming did a 16, but he was probably one of the only ones. And then you've got Eli and Oivind and everyone doing sort of that cool radio axis and just slightly different ways of doing their 14, 12s, 14, 16s, or 12s and 14s mainly. But yeah, it's good.
Yeah, because Eli's kind of rail sections as well were nicely mixed up between like kind of the tech stuff and the spinny to winny stuff. But I remember that from one tail press on the with Rainbow, was it? Or the goalpost was legit. It's cool to see tail presses and nose presses coming back into slopestyle runs.
Totally.
Coming from a rail rider. Then anything else from semi? Should we skip into finals?
Yeah, let's get into the results.
Cool. So we'll go through the men's first because we've been talking about them in the semi-finals, but Cam Spalding coming through in first place. So back-to-back slopestyle wins for Cam. Red Gerard in second. And then Noah Victor, I think, was the surprise podiumer in third. Like, I think that might be his first World Cup podium, especially at a major event like the Open. So very cool to see Noah Victor up there. On a side note, I remember we almost kidnapped him at Korvac Silver Plano World Cup the year before. Because he came to ask us a question. We were already in the van. It was raining, so we told him just to jump in the van, and it did seem like we'd kidnapped the poor kid. We hadn't, but that's what I always spring to mind whenever I see Noah Victor's name on a result sheet. But yeah, like Cam's run was nicely laced. It had that the front 14 Stelmaski, the back 16 tail off those kind of twisted sisters, and we, as you say, we didn't see many 16s throughout Laax. And then yeah, switch back 12. Chuck flip on the quarter pipe, which quite nice to see something a little bit different rather than your staple 5s and 7s that we saw from Pachulas, adding in that axis, which worked nicely for the composition score and just tech rails as well. So I kind of think a pretty worthy winner at the top. Red had the higher trick score, but I think composition for that balance in directions and rotations just won through for Cam. So it was pretty tight at the top. And then Liam Braley just unlucky in fourth place by 0.3 if we go to the overall scores.
Yeah, that one, Red Mr. Consistent, not quite enough to beat Cam's, but I think, like you said, Cam was well and truly up there, but, you know, Red had the Miller flip and spun all four directions and finished off pretty strong on the rail. Liam was a big one for me in that one. I think he was a little bit hard done by and probably would have had him on the podium. I think he was a victim at the math. Like, that one was an interesting course because we actually had 7 sections, which, you know, section by, go back into the nerdy maths talk, but section by section was designed for 6 sections. It was 20, 20, 20 to equal 60 and 40 for composition. Suddenly when you've got an extra section, there's not enough to round evenly into 100, and it shouldn't matter, but it does seem to. So, you know, he won the first rail. As well.
Like you see, when we go to 7 sections, you change the trick score to being out of 63, if I remember correctly, and the composition score to out of 37. So each section is worth 9 points. Then this is kind of the key thing to remember as we go into the slope styles this season is, like, if we have a 7-section course, then each section is out of 9. Because I know...
Yeah, we're working on communicating that differently. It'll be hopefully what people see and the riders will see will still be that, you know, a 9s club's still a 9s club, as like you said before, when it's a 7-section course. And 82 could be one of the winning hits of that run, and it's usually, it would have been 95, but when it's compressed, it just doesn't look as good, and it's harder. It's not as clear. Like, all the things we like section by section for kind of takes away. So
yeah, but then, like, your flip side is if you try to tie 2 of those sections together and have, like, the quarter pipe and the last rails as one section, then you kind of take that section out of the course because you'll have good quarter pipe, bad rail, and bad quarter pipe, good rail, and just gets lost.
Yeah,
it's a kind of worst case scenario sort of thing. It's hard to figure out, and that's almost where overall impression would help that sort of situation out.
Yeah, like you'd look at Liam's run, and it kind of had everything on that. It was like hard way 2-4 out, back 16, cab 14 tail, switch back 12. He went front 7 on the quarter pipe, which was higher and bigger than most of the hits on that. Like, probably a little undercooked on that. I think if he'd got a bigger score there, that might have changed the outcome. And it's probably same with the last rail too. Like, he went, like, just what we were talking about before, he went hard way cab too. So he had the risk, he had the difficulty, he had a trick that, was a lot higher consequences than a lot of the other tricks on that section. He was unlucky in that one, probably.
Yeah, because his trick score was the highest of the day in terms of the points just from the sections. It comes down to that composition, which had him a little bit lower. And I wonder, I wasn't a composition judge on that one. I was elsewhere. But whether that's just because it's not to throw anyone else into the bus, but I can't speak to it too much. But like, if it's just that quarter pipe hit of being a standard 7, whereas Cam, Red, and Noah all did inverted tricks on the quarter pipe to kind of add that extra axis in. So I'm wondering, but whether that was the big kind of sticking point in people's heads when they're looking at that composition and variety, because the rest of it seems solid, kind of mirrored hardway front twos on both front side and cab, and then using that hard rail first feature, doing the nose press and then the back tail 2 out of the donkey dick rather than the standard down rail. So had good use of course, which comes into that composition, but just wondering that maybe missing one axis, as it were, might have just held him back.
Yeah, and like I said, I feel like it's that last, maybe just a little undercooked. But, I guess if we're looking at that, Dusty probably had the same thing in qualies. He had some sick flow and style. The execution and composition was there. He just didn't get the section scores. He did a sick double crippler pullback, which was kind of unique. And maybe we didn't go high enough on that.
Yeah. It's always one of those woulda, shoulda, coulda kind of situations. Like, you look back at the results afterwards, and this is, I guess, where our strong point is over last season, is we've looked at the results and kind of tried to analyze the maths aspect. I mean, like, all right, how much should that I've got? Like, where did he go? Because obviously, as we said, this is still mathematical tech system, so it's a work in progress. But we got into it. By the time we got through to World Champs at the end of the season, I think we were pretty dialed in that kind of point ranges per section. But as a head judge, you got no idea because you're looking at 7 different competitions and 8 scores coming through, and you just kind of, my experience has just been fully overwhelmed with information.
Yeah, it's intense.
But I guess our other big talking point from Laax, well, not necessarily a big talking point, but standout trick, Noah Victor, the kidnap kid, Act 16 melon to tail, which is pretty sick. On that first jump, a little bit smaller, not many 16s on that jump. I think it was kind of just him and Red. And Liam Burley that managed to actually get a 16 on that, and doing the double grab and a legit double grab, not a rotational helping double grab, like with the melon to tail. It was nicely executed, high difficulty, so got a decent reward on that section. So definitely, maybe you're outside one to watch coming into this important season.
Yeah, on those creative courses for sure. Just a unique run.
Yeah, I'll try not to kidnap him again though. That might be for the best. And then going on to the women's side of things, I believe we didn't do semis for the women's. It went straight from qualification because it was just one heat of qualies. But top 3, Mia Brooks in first place, Zoe Sadowski-Sinnott in second, and Kokomo Miraze in third. So Mia, I believe, making it back-to-back Laax wins. I think she won the season before. Can't fully remember going that far back, but I know she's at least won 2 Laax Opens now. Does help that she lives there and has since she was about 12 or 13. So it's kind of a home territory for her. But like, Mia was just dialed in, and I think the level of rail riding that she had just kind of kept it above the rest of that field.
Yeah, she just got better the whole way down the hill on that one. I think she won the last 3 features. She just got it done at the top and just kept getting better and better. Yeah, took advantage of that home court advantage.
Do you know my only little niggle with Mia's run, which I think we've talked about last season, was it almost had that repeat trick.
Yes.
And it's one of those whichever criteria you focus on, because that's only impacting the variety criteria, but she had the 50-50 front 3 with the rocket on section 2, and then 50 to back blunt 2 out on the last section, which are mechanically 2 very similar tricks, but that's just my sticking point. But when you take together the whole run, all the rest of the tricks and the criteria, it still comes out on top. It's just one of those little sticking points for me mentally.
We do just variety counts on rails too.
Yeah. And that's where one of those, in that, your trick score could be quite high and the composition score could be dropped a little bit further because of repeat directions and repeat tricks. But again, maths. How much do you dock for 2 similar tricks when everything else is pretty laced together? But yeah, very great first section, super tech. Yeah, I'd say she had the most tech rails out of all of the women's field.
Yeah, and then this one, Zoe in second, straight back after New Zealand. She was off injured, so New Zealand, she was unlucky and went down, and this one she's straight back to the podium and massive switch back 12, spun all directions and finished off strong with backboard 50-50 front one out. I think when it just sort of proved that she was hurt, but she came back strong and she's always one to watch out for.
Yeah, and adding switchback 12 into, like, which is just about coming around as like a more regular big air trick, but actually throwing that in a slopestyle run is just a whole next level. Kind of shows Zoe's mentality a little bit, which is pretty solid. Now, it Kokomo in third. I had Zoe, to be fair, going back to Zoe, I did think she was a little bit zeechy on the last rail, but that could be me being a bit overly critical from an armchair in the middle of summer rather than actually being in the zone. I was obviously in a bad mood when I went back and rewatched Laax. Yeah, third place, Kokomo, really nice, like kind of first rail trick, and then having the front double 10 truck. Again, like we're starting to see that more progressive kicker tricks coming through in the slopestyle from the women's, which is really sick to see. And it's women's riding is just going through the roof at the moment. I always feel.
Yeah, the back nine tail was sick. I think she won. She won a bunch of features, but it was all at the top. And, unlike Zoe, she didn't spin all direction. She had repeated tricks. It really came down to the composition, that one. And I think that's why competition's there to catch that stuff that the section judges don't.
Yeah. The section judges just can't look at variety because they're only on one section and there's no variety in one section. So it is kind of interesting how that one plays out. And you look at the run on paper and it was front 10, back 9, both pretty sick, but then just the cab under flip 5 compared to the 7s that we saw from Mia and Zoe, which adds in that blind element. So just that little change in difficulty affects the score quite a lot in that section. Like she's almost looking at the math side of things, because we're talking maths all the time. She dropped 2 full points in that section. So there, and this is where like section by section is beautiful as a coach or athlete, because you go back through that and be like, look, this is where I'm kind of leaving points on the field. Need to change that trick to get myself an extra 2 points up in the overall, which I quite like, but we can get nerdy on that as much as we like all the way through. But yeah, she had pure execution, I would kind of say. I was I want to say like stock Kokomo riding, like when she's on, it's dialed in, it looks good, it's executed well. Definitely another one to follow. And then Anagasa in 4th, I believe, just off the podium. And I'm kind of going to make the same comment of a repeated rail trick in sections 1 and 2. Because it is like, this is, again, being really pernickety, but you kind of have to be as a composition judge, but it's switch front tail press, no slide pretzel 2 into switchback blunt 2 to end up as very similar mechanically tricks once you're on the rail, but they were still both nicely executed, scored quite well. Then went into her cab 9 that we spoke about in the big air with that cool axis that she's dialed in last season, and then the back 7, and then just it started to lose a bit of kind of energy as we got towards the end of that run. It was just a little crippler, not the best backside air, and then just the front board at the end, whereas we saw the likes of Mia and Zoe rotating out of that bottom rail as well. So, just kind of tapered off towards the end, if you're being overly harsh, as I obviously was on the watchback. But it'll be interesting Laax this year, because this will be one of our test events for our Olympic panel. So that'll definitely be one to watch. We've got Aspen and Laax, full Olympic panel in attendance for the 2 Slopestyles prior Olympics. So we'll be getting dialed in as a crew, or even more dialed in than we currently are. So that's kind of us at the halfway point of the slope season almost, even though we're only 2 events in. It's kind of a short slopestyle season compared to the likes of Big Air. And then next up, we went over to Aspen. And Aspen we hadn't been to Aspen for a World Cup since 2021 World Championships, I believe, if I remember my history of travel correctly. And that was obviously during that COVID era. So quite nice to be back in Aspen. Beautiful place. Good course, week after X Games, so a lot of riding time, and that kind of massively affected the riding we had in the slopestyle.
Yeah, it was that. They basically left the course from X Games. It was a Charles Beckinsale build, so, jumps for firing. Everyone was pretty stoked with it, and like you said, you get so much training time at X Games. So those that were at X Games were completely dialed in. They somehow managed to paint the rails black in between the quick changeover of events. They took some gear up there, and all the green ones, they pulled out the ones on the side that no one had used and painted the others black, so the course got a little freshen up. And yeah, everyone came. There was some good training days. I think the wind was up one day, and that day we had like just the most killer rail session at the top of the course, where everyone was sort of trying to work out those tricky rail lines. But we saw Renee getting creative, and I think our whole panel was just up there. It was like just as good as it gets watching rail riding at the top there for that one day when it was a bit windy to jump. But then other than that, training was good and good course.
Yeah, because that rail sections, like you go in rail, and then 3 straight jumps. But those rail sections are so jam-packed together that it's very much a kind of a risk and reward. If you lace your rail tricks, then you're grand. The slightest mistake or coming off a little bit early or catching an edge on landing, you just sacked all your speed for the next two. So it is a definite separator. So as a rider, you've got to find that balance between how tech can I go on the rails without risking fucking up and ruining the whole run. But I, like, as a rail course, was pretty sick because we had super street kind of start section, had a flat down, had a down bar, double kink, and then a transfer rail on the right that I don't think anyone really used. And then you go into like a bit of a quick step up, step down kind of rail, like very pop up and over. And then more of an interesting final rail section with the battleship, the long rainbow down, and like a little cannon as well. So there was a good chance for some rail variety in there, which shone through from certain members of the athlete community. Should we go into the results?
Yeah, totally. Even before that, like that rainbow rail, we saw some stuff in, Line was trying to back seven that, and Pred's out at one point. Hannah Norman was back threeing, and it was one of those perfect rails that people are trying to replicate in park and photo shoot setups at the moment. But it was in a course and it's actually quite blind, so it was kind of high consequence. So the riders that were doing those tricks on that one, like whilst it was a rainbow, we saw some awesome stuff on that. But yeah, that's probably my only one to touch on before we go into results.
Yeah, because we mentioned Hannah Norman quite a bit in the big air. Like I don't know if she'd been around the World Cups much before last season, but last season really seemed to get prominent and regular. And yeah, that back three on doesn't look too gnarly from the screen, like when you're just watching on TV, because it's a kind of a wider angle on the lens. But when you actually go stand in that kind of flat bottom between sections 2 and 3, that end of the down rail is fully blind to you. You fully have to trust how training's gone. She pulled it together in qualies, but then fell on both attempts in finals, which was a shame, because that, I believe, would have been the top score in that section, if I remember correctly, or at least up there in those 8s and 9s for sure. So that was a shame to see, but I'm like, she's one of the promising talents we're going to see from that next gen of women coming through. So definitely another one to watch out for if we're going through, those ones. But this was Zoe's return to the top of the podium. First place for her, pretty solid run. Kokomo Maraze in second, Mia Brooks in third. So same podium as Laax, just a bit of a switcheroo of which step they stood on.
Yeah.
Zoe.
Yeah, she won that one by a mile. Yeah, she was, I think it was, I don't have the scores in front of me, but from memory, she was a long way ahead on that one. And, the rails were good, switch front blunt 2, cab 2, 4, and then what did she do? 9, 10, 10 combo.
Yeah, it was 2 picture perfect 10s to finish that run, which is insane. And going back to composition, she had the full variety because jumps were switchback, frontside, backside. But then second section, she had cab 2 on, 4 out. So it kind of managed to, even though there's only 3 jumps, it ticked off the 4 directions really nicely. Whereas I think Kokomo just behind her in second kind of repeated that cab because she had cab 2-2 on the second section and then cab 9 on the first jump. So it's like that's, again, split in hairs a little bit, but that was the big kind of separator in those composition scores. Because she had 10-10 as well on the last 2 jumps, trying to break down the scores. Because we got the score sheets in front of us and it was marginal in terms of the section scores, especially on 5 and 6. But yeah, composition was the big chunk. Well, to be fair, cab 2 on, 4 out from Zoe on that second rail section was huge step up in progression.
Yeah. The podium was kind of fair bit ahead on this one, wasn't it? It kind of, people were struggling, the girls were struggling to put it down or something in finals.
Yeah, did we have a weather issue or did something go on? Because Annika Morgan down in 4th place, but 20 points off in the overall. So yeah, I think the podium was just a step ahead. I don't even know if we had some injuries. Can't fully remember. I feel like someone went down heavy in training before finals, but I couldn't for the life of me tell you who it was. I
remember the mornings were icy, but
the mornings were really good groomers for us though. I do remember that much from Aspen, like pure crispy dream, like commute to work from the top station all the way down. Good times. Maybe we'll get the same again this year in Aspen. Maybe a bit more snow. Who knows?
Fingers crossed.
Typical rails from Mia had the fifth, back 1 on, cab 3 out, and then cab 1 on, front 3 out. So 2 tech rail tricks to start off. 1 same way rotation, 1 with a pretzel rotation. Just kind of the board slide. 270 out on section 3, and then 7, 9, 10 on the jumps. So that was the bit that she was kind of lacking, was that difficulty compared to 9, 10, 10 that we saw the combinations from Zoe and Kokomo. So because that was the big kind of separator if we look at the points. And again, lacking that switch backside rotation, so comes back down to the variety criteria, which is where Zoe definitely shot through a full 8 points ahead in the overall. But that was my kind of, well, one of my favorite comps of the season, because this is when I felt like we started to get fully into the swing of how the system works. Brings us nicely into the men's.
Yeah, you can take this one because I feel like this was your standout of the season.
Yeah, this was. If you go back and listen to episode 1 and we're looking at highlights from the season, this, for me as a snowboarder, was definitely my kind of highlight, because Frank Jobin won in first place for his first World Cup win, I believe. Su Yiming in second, Sean Fitzsimmons in third. And the bit for me with Frank's run was just the jumps were only a 10, 12, 12, which is, in the grand scheme of things on paper, is a pretty lower rotational kickers combination. But the pure variety from start to finish was pretty sick. It's half cab on, nose press to bag one. So proper street trick, as you'd kind of expect from someone out of the east coast of Canada, and then switch back 2 on 4 out of the next rail section, and then the really fun kind of board slide switch up 270 out on the battleship. So 3 very interesting tech and nice variety of rail tricks before he goes into a hard way double 10 off the toes, or not necessarily hard way, depends how you look at it, but front 10 off the toes with the nose grab into the backside 12 Stelmaski, and then the switchback double rodeo 12 nose as well. So 3 very different jumps in terms of takeoffs, 1 off the toes front side, 1 typical, 1 rodeo. So I, from a composition side of things, love this one just because it had a bit of everything, wasn't focused too much on the difficulty, but for me it just stood out, Sean, as a cool snowboarding run. And it was pretty nice that we were actually able to get to reward that one rather than it being a spin to win. So that's why that was my highlight of the season. Love to see a half cab nose press in contest. That's that was my little thing. Sadly, I wasn't on the rails to give it the reward, but the guys did, who were on section 1, highest scoring trick in that first section, I believe, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, Dane had a nice nose press on that first section too, and yeah, it was one of those ones that's, yeah, whilst you're not turning the board sideways, to do a proper press in competition and maintain that throughout the whole rail, there is a degree of risk there. So it was well rewarded in that one. And like you said, Frank's rails, they were, it was a straight rail section. He crushed the rail section, and whilst his jumps may not have had the difficulty, the variety was there, and he ended up, composition put him through on that one. So it was good. First World Cup podium and a win. So that's one way to do it.
It was sick. And we talked, like you just mentioned, the risk of the nose press. We're not necessarily talking like how risky the trick is, but it's like if you don't execute that press perfectly, suddenly you go to a half cab 50-50 back one, which you're suddenly at the bottom end of the scale for that section rather than holding it in the press. But Danes was sick through the double kink as well. So that was very, very cool to see, and very cool that, and this is the beauty of the section by section system, is that can get rewarded and we can show that we're rewarding it. Whereas in overall impression, you could still reward it, but it's not quite as clear. But that was a good message. They were like, cool, well executed, difficult rail tricks will score well, which is really cool. Su Yiming, second place, decent run, went the opposite way of doing 14, 16, 14 on the jumps. And again, good, not necessarily the same level of like street tech on the rails, but good execution, good amount of rotations all the way through.
Yeah, surprisingly, that was his first podium. So I didn't realize, he obviously got the silver at the Olympics, but he'd never had a World Cup slope podium. So another silver for him. And it was, like you say, it was a really good run. He had everything. It was, really good jumps. I think looking back on his, it was just that second rail, the cab 2 with a stale. It's like, at that level, and you're comparing his rails to Frank's, a cab 2 is just not going to cut it. Had he just got, he was in the middle of the pack with a bunch of people doing that on that. Had he done just a different trick on that rail, that would have put him in first on that one, I think. From memory, the scores were quite close.
Switchback 2-2 instead of cab 2-2 would have jumped it up a significant amount on the section and in the composition in my head. But like I'd never realized, and this was Su Yiming just coming off the back of a little niggle injury from Klagenfurt and Kreisberg, big airs as well. But I just assumed he had way more World Cups in the bag, World Cup podiums in the bag.
Yeah.
Because who starts off your podium career with an Olympic medal is kind of doing it backwards.
Yeah, and he's always there in the conversation. So you just I'm like you, I just assumed he had a handful.
Yeah, especially seeing as there's a Madame Two Swords wax version of him in Beijing when you walk through. Obviously you get that for the Olympic podium, not quite the World Cup podium. So yeah, it's a very good run. And then Sean Fitzsimmons also, like, he's been one of those as like there or thereabouts, regular in finals, maybe not quite pushing up to the podium as much. That was really cool to see him on. Big front 2-2 on the first rail, gap into the down. And then, yeah, you cab one backflip out on that one because he was the only one to use that funky little wavy rail. Interesting choice of rail trick, but worked out quite well. And then goes into back 3 on, front 1 out on that long down rainbow, if I remember correctly, that we spoke about from Hannah Norman's. So again, same kind of risk in terms of blind onto the rail and then going pretzel out at the end. So
Yeah.
a good,
and it was a real
good
long
balance
down
of-
too.
It was sizable. I would have slipped off very early on. So like good balance of rail tricks and so it was a bit of a spin to win on, bit of an inversion, bit of tech on the last one, and then went switchback 16, back triple 14, and then front triple 14. Sean's one of the few that still has that front triple 14. It kind of went through an era, and then I think people realized how risky and gnarly that trick was, and he's the only one that really seems to still pull it into a slopestyle run.
Yeah, it's gnarly, that trick, and he does flip him as opposed to flat spin him, but he does them super well. It's real blind. That front triple is as good as it gets. He's one, and he always goes deep on it. Stomps the absolute shit out of it most of the time. So yeah, it's a good one.
So his scores were coming up in the same way as like 16s on that jump.
Yeah, and similar to Chris Corning, he can muscle a landing way down the bottom of the landing, down on the 4th or 5th line. He can, he'll fall out of the sky on that triple, land right at the bottom, and somehow be on his feet riding away. So yeah, he
doesn't
gets
skip leg day.
Get some love on that one.
And then Dane Menzies I think was 4th, but again Dane, another one again just emerging into that kind of core group of regular finalists. He's been up there in the mix. Another one with good rail tricks. Just I think it was a switchback 12 on his first jump because he went switchback 12, back 14, front 18 on the last jump. But yeah, switchback 12 was just that weaker point, I'd have said. And I guess like the switchback 3 on section 3 was coming up at a like very average score. I can't fully remember if it was a mistake from him to potentially slipped off a bit early. Yeah, like on paper, decent tricks. Just the switchback 12 was falling short. But again, a good gap between the podium and 4th. So, and everyone seemed pretty happy with that result.
Yeah, and the other standouts for me were Liam. Sick double back 12. The way it's like a 14, but he holds it at 12. All his rails were good. I think he's one that could have well been in that podium discussion. There's a bit of room for improvement there, but that could have definitely seen him slide up a few places.
Yeah,
he was a standout there.
Cab 18 last here as well, just a bit of a washy landing.
Yeah.
That, again, makes a difference. We go back to that conversation of do you want a money Buddha to be on the last section or do you want a rail section? And that's where having 18s thrown at the end of the run, I think, is quite cool for the crowd and the audience who might not quite get the technical difficulties of certain rail tricks, especially Aspen coming out of X Games. Big high rotation is always going to go down well with the crowd. Yeah,
and that is a good money Buddha. The other one that was memorable there was Kuba's back 12 rodeo. Like it was,
yes,
I think was he Melon or something. It was just I don't know where his result ended up, but yeah, it was a nice little glimpse of niceness in the middle of the course.
I believe it was second highest score on that section, just behind Su Yiming's switchback 16. But you're right, like this was a very standout moment because it's only the single rodeo. We've seen the rodeo 12s as doubles most of the time recently, so very more unique way of spinning, which works great for the composition guys, and it worked great on that section as well. So definitely up there. It was a 9.1. So solid, solid trick, and then straight into the cab 18 as well. So good combination of back-to-back tricks.
Yeah, and this was one where we kind of backed up what we were talking about with the riders. Those unique axes and those rotations. A 12 could compete against a 16 if it was executed well and on that difficult axis that no one's really doing. So yeah, I think Aspen was a good one for everything: weather, results, riding, course. It was one of the fun ones, and up with my highlights of the season too.
Yeah. Once I got there after my Esther difficulties, it was a decent trip, and we were there for a nice period because we had big air and pipe as well. So kind of nice to actually fully settle into it. Lots of conversations with riders. I think that was the one we were very dialed for this season. But cool. So Aspen done. This one, like Calgary's always interesting because you don't necessarily get the weather in the same way, or the weather issues you do. Calgary get weather issues in terms of temperature, and this year I think when we got there it was -20 to -25. By the end of the week, it had gone up to +8 in terms of Celsius. can't do the Fahrenheit conversion off the top of my head. But so lots of weather issues to play for. Was a very shallow course, so the riders were definitely struggling for speed a bit into the jumps. But 3 decent rails, kind of a standard transfer rail section 1, and then a bit more street for section 2 with a little step up, step down butter pad. Section 3 was, again, your kind of shootout rail and higher rotational rail tricks, then small jump, big jump, and then the interesting bit was the quarter pipes, section 6. So 1 on each side, so it was equally balanced, or quarter pipe takeoffs, which, again, was an interesting separator for a lot of the riders. If you were able to actually get up to, for the men's, doing 10s or 14s out of there, really did stand out compared to those that didn't have that last blind part of the rotation. So it was an interesting course, interesting conditions. It was my first time head judging as well, so that was an interesting experience for me. And I got to grips with section by section head judging and came out of that booth fully mentally drained for sure. But women's podium, we'll kick off with Mari Fakada taking another win that season. Annika Morgan in second for one of her first slopestyle podiums. She's been on the big air podium, if I remember correctly. I think she might have had a Laax World Cup podium in the past, but she's one that's on the day she's pretty solid. And then Mia Brooks down in third. So yeah, another podium for Mia, which goes well for that kind of crystal globe chasing, as it were. Yeah, it was decent runs from all the women. A lot of tech on the rails for sure. The only bit that I think we as judges missed was the frontside 5 at the end was slightly under rotated, but from our camera angle, it didn't look as bad as when we saw from someone else's angle down at the bottom, which we weren't able to use. So that was possibly one of those things with a bit more time, bit better, or bit different TV angles might have changed the result a little bit. But it's pretty close at the top between Annika and Mari. Annika's run,
yeah, I wasn't at that one, but yeah, my armchair critic from the couch was Annika's front set of melons on the last feature in qualies. It was, I think it was a low scorer compared to some of the other people that were doing tricks on that. Yeah. I wasn't there. So.
Yeah,
I think it got us talking though, didn't it? It definitely got us talking about how one trick can affect the overall spread of results, and had that been in finals, it may have been way more of a talking point too.
Yeah, especially we were kind of fortunate I think she'd done the front 7 in finals. She'd have clearly won because she just did that front 3 on the last hit. Kind of missed the tail grab a little bit, but looking at the points, there's less than a point separating the first 2. So if she then bumps that up to a 7 on the last one, suddenly that's going to take it through. If we'd hammered Mari more for the under rotation, then she'd have dropped into second place. So you kind of come into very, very close with the maths. And this was one like we had a chat with Annika afterwards. We then kind of rewatched it afterwards as a gang in the hotel, and even watched with an OI kind of brain rather than section by section. As a full panel, we were still split. People changed their minds who they had in first and second. So it was naturally really close, and we kind of left it to maths, obviously. And then Mia in third, kind of standard Mia rails, just super tech, super locked in. And then that back 9 cab 10, or back 9 cab 9, actually on a winning run, or highest scoring run. Just a little bit loose on the cab 10, I believe, on the landing in run 1. And then Tess Cody just off the podium, 4th place. I think that was one of her better results of the season, because she was just coming back from injury at that time, if I remember correctly. I think that was her first one back, potentially.
She didn't do a lot last year.
No, I was looking at you as the token Australian that might know the inside scoop. But yeah, so I'd have said a decent finals to watch, and it was a nice course. Be interesting to be able to break it down more, but you had the likes of Rebecca Flynn in the mix. Maisie Hill qualified for her first World Cup final as well. Didn't fully put a run together. Then you had Laura Anger from Estonia. Another one that's kind of coming through and through. I judged her first ever front 10 in Font-Romeu at the Europa Cup last season before. So she's another one that's kind of sneaking through. So we're starting to get a list of finalists that's really got a bit of youth thrown in with experience, which will start to push that progression through for sure.
Yeah, and there's some depth in that women's field.
There is. That's, again, we talk about Olympic predictions on the last one, but predicting a women's slopestyle final is going to be hard. But we'll get to that as we go throughout the season. And then on the men's side of things, Ollie Martin took first place for his first World Cup podium and first World Cup win. Or was he on the podium somewhere in Aspen Big Air? I think he might have just been on the podium.
Yeah, this was his first win of the season. I think he might have just got a podium the week before and then backed it up here.
Yeah. Red Gerard in second place again, as you say, Mr. Consistent. Then Marcus Cleveland in third place on the podium. And I guess that was all pretty clear cut. Like Ollie was the only one to go 14 on the last feature. It was a nicely laced run, to be fair. Very tech on the rails, and then 12, 14, 14 on the jumps. Only want to have that kind of combination. It was interesting how it split out, because we had the likes of Red and Jake Cantor doing 18s on the second jump, the straight jump, which carried through a lot of points, but just lacked a bit on the other sections. It was pretty tight at the top. And I guess our main talking points, we look more towards Judd Hanks's run, because that was our big judge's talking point afterwards. And again, we come back to mathematical reward on the sections, because his last two jumps were like front one nose butter into switchback 9, and then backside double 10 on the final jump, but off the heels rather than off the toes. And this goes back into that conversation of how much does that hard way takeoff affect the difficulty. The answer was significantly. Should have been one of the highest scoring tricks on the section, because it just massively changed it from a toe side, backside 10 from those quarter pipes. So that was one that slipped through the cracks. Again, going into the time pressure of you get 20 seconds to put your scores in. It was a mistake on the judge's part for sure. So Judd, if you're listening, apologies. We had a good discussion with Judd and Dusty about that afterwards, but it was one of those that we should have rewarded more. We just didn't quite get the full amount of time to properly analyze it and see what was going on. But very cool from a composition aspect to start to see these different takeoffs being kind of a key separator in terms of the composition, like having the nose butter and then the hard way takeoff, as well as, was it cab double 12 on the first jump. So it had a good mix of takeoffs, good mix of variety, mirrored the front blunt 2 and the switch front blunt 2 on the rails. So lots of decent talking points, just got missed by the judges. So that was my big learning point going forwards, which is something I think you do really well as a head judge on these things. When you get in chase for time, you know when the big moments are happening, just to throw that time watch out the window. Time watch? Stopwatch out the window and just focus on getting the right result. Yeah. Turn the radio down and just press mute and give us a minute to get the right result out, because we've been snaked by that one in the past. Other than that, I can't remember too much else coming up from Calgary as a major issue. That was just the one kind of sour point. Taiga Asagawa just missed the podium in 4th. It was a pretty tight podium, between 6 points between 1st and 4th. Or 1st and 5th,
I think Liam, Truth and Dusty were good on the rails there. Dusty had a heater of a run on that one. I think it was his first rail trick let him down, but I think that was it.
Truth off a little bit.
Truth's always good on the rails.
Yeah, and it was nice to see Truth in the finals as well, because as we said before, he often misses out a little bit, but put it together pretty good in qualies, got himself up and into the mix. Not a good showing for the Canadians on home soil, though. Truth in 13th, Liam in 14th, Cam down in 16th. Disappointing to the crowd. But I guess that's our Calgary one pretty wrapped up. We're going back to Calgary this year, but just for pipe rather than slope, which is a bit of a shame. So on to our final Slopestyle World Cup of the season. And you were back in the head judge spot for this one. We were in Flackow, linked into Spring Battle, which obviously a long-standing video contest. You had the pleasure of judging that one as well, didn't you, this time round?
Yeah, that was a tough one. Yeah, it was true Spring Battle. I mean, they get a week to battle with the course, and it was a bit of a battle this year. There was, it was spring. There was, this deep slush between the two jumps, and the landings were just riding through there was just buck. You're just trying to hang on. So, there's guys doing massive and girls doing massive tricks, and then just trying to muscle through the slush into those bottom jumps. But with a week to put down a run, we ended up having to judge 60 landed males runs and 30 landed females runs, which doesn't get any more difficult. Rough. Yeah, it was as hard as it gets. So if nothing else, it was great training to warm them up for the World Cup next week. There was no one saying they hadn't had enough time on the course.
But what time did you finish judging for Spring Battle?
I think it was bang on midnight. I strapped in at the top of the resort and had to ride back down through the resort under full moon, which was a pretty cool experience.
Yeah, not bad. But yeah, day before qualies as well, so not ideal prep. So I think we're back in Flackow this season. I think they still work with Spring Battle, but they might try make the schedules align a bit nicer. The reason it was so jam-packed last season was we were supposed to be somewhere else for that World Cup. I feel like one event got cancelled and we just kind of piggybacked into Flackow.
Yes, something got cancelled and we ended up. Oh, maybe it was Lavinia.
It was Lavinia.
It was the non-test event.
Yeah, the anti-test event, which was a shame that one fell through, because that would have been our first glimpse of how the slopestyle course was looking for the Olympics. But difficulties in construction, I believe, last summer was the reason it got pushed back. It's very kind of the Austrian Federation and Flackow and Spring Battle to kind of let us tag alongside that one, because that was cool. And it's nice that it's come back as another fixture on this year's calendar rather than just being a one-off. I did worry that we'd end up in teen with the skiers because they were in a World Cup at the same time. And in the past, when that week's been cancelled, we've gone to teen, and teen is a great resort, but it's full of drunk British people, which makes the experience slightly less exciting than Flackout, where it's a core. Flackout's a pretty core snowboard spot.
Yeah, Absolute's as core as it gets for snowboarders in Europe, I think. It's a sick resort.
Yeah. And like rather interesting, third World Cup in Austria for the season, all within like a 90-minute drive of each other. So it was like a nice little park and pipe hub for snowboarding last season. But into the, do you want to talk us through, well, you've mentioned a bit about the slush for Spring Battle. What was the issue with the World Cup? Because we only have women's results. Because, well, do you want to give us the why there's no men's results?
Yeah, well, we had Spring Battle, which was super spring-like, like I said before, and then the day the World Cup hit, so did winter came back, and it just started dumping snow. We had the winds and a bit of everything. So I think, from memory, we went back to double up for women on that one, and yeah, got a result, but it was tough going.
And men's, I think you started to run qualies. Did you get to almost the end of run one or the end of run two?
Yeah, we pretty much, I think the call was getting made to cancel it as we're almost through to the end of run one. And then, yeah, it was hard. There was a lot of non-landed runs, but then René's come down and bumped himself into first. And I think he would have really needed that result. So it's a shame we couldn't do a second run. I think the majority on the jury was to can that one on that day. So yeah, there was tough conditions on that course. So that one ended up getting canned for the men's. Yeah, it was just deteriorating. It was just dumping. It was not an easy decision, but yeah, I think sometimes it's in the best for the riders. And then that pretty much after the call was made, they went straight into the presentations for the Crystal Globe, and that was Cam Spalding for the men and Zoe for the women. So there was a little celebration in dumping snow while they got the Crystal Globes.
Yeah, because Cam obviously won 2 of the events this season, so put in a pretty good standing. I like that about this slopestyle season was it wasn't just the same 3 rotating through the podium all the way from start to finish. It was you had Cam winning 2, you had Frank winning 1, you had Ollie Martin winning 1. Like it was a good mix and shows the depth that both men's and women's snowboarding has in the big air and slopestyle scene. But with Flackout, course is pretty interesting because it has that quarter pipe redirect for section 1, which is something you don't, well, wall ride redirect. Did I say quarter pipe? Wall ride redirect as a first rail section, which is pretty interesting. It's not something you see in slopestyle courses nowadays. Then into 2 rail sections and 2 jumps, was it, if I remember correctly? Or was it 3 jumps?
3 jumps.
So it's an interesting slopestyle course for sure, from what I remember. But in the women's side of things, Zoe took the win, Annika Morgan back-to-back for second, and then Mary Furcada in third with Kokomo just off. And again, coming from that OI double-up panel as well. So I had your work cut out for women's there. Interesting to do women's double-up, because usually that's the one that gets, usually it's just one heat, but I think they were panicked for time and a weather window, if I remember.
Yeah, I think we'd already lost a day. I think we were just battling to get an event. Like it was the day before had been cancelled, and then it was just we were fast running out of time, so it was just trying to get a result. Little bookend on the season when we start the season like that and finish the season like that, unfortunately.
Says everything. I think it went marginally better than the season before, where I think that one we only had 3 slopestyle World Cups actually finish. That was the year we went to teen, I remember that much. But they need 3 to do the Crystal Globe. So I think that was why there was a big push. Whereas interestingly, this season pre-Olympics, we've only got 2 World Cups slopestyles, which is, puts the pressure on a little bit for those riders trying to scrape points together.
Totally. And they're right there just before the Olympics too. So it's going to be a real chase for points.
Yeah, it's going to be, well, it's manic for us because we do Aspen, then Laax, start of January. I think we have a week off and then we go into the big show in Milano, or Livigno is where we're based. But that's a wrap through for the slopestyle, bit rapid fire. And this is one as we go through next season and we break it down contest by contest. We'll be able to go into more detail when it's fresh in our minds and not 6 months afterwards. But just before we kind of finish the episode, we've got to do our little AI predictions.
Milano Cortina, that's the next big scene. The Olympics are coming, a dream so keen, so tune in close. Get the lowdown for real, behind the scenes of snowboarding, how it all feels.
So there we go. Fun little jingle to introduce into this. And this is one, I think this is your idea coming into this, that we asked ChatGPT, they predict for our Milano podiums for the slopestyle. So we did this in the big air, which came out with some pretty interesting results. Are you ready to hear the AI predictions for slopestyle, Beggsy?
Yes.
And ChatGPT is actually giving me some justifications as well, which is interesting. So in the women's, to start off with, ChatGPT has Zoe Sadowski-Synnott as the gold medalist, 3-time world champion, recent form strong. It's got Kokomo Muraze in silver, just for consistency, and she's won silver at big events before. And then Rira Iwabuchi in the bronze medal position. Yeah. It does say possibly Mary or Mia, depending on run performance, which kind of take that as that's a pretty decent prediction given what we've seen last season. We haven't really mentioned Rira in the slopestyle review that much. You got brought up a few times in episode 2 in our big air, but scraped through. So that is an interesting pull from ChatGPT. Trying to have a read through, but we'll get through to the men's. It's got in gold medal position Liam Braley for highest consistency in the recent World Championships title. In silver, Su Yi Ming, which I don't know if it's just going off. It says had a recent Olympic silver, which I don't know if that's something to go off because that was 4 years ago. And then in bronze, it's actually got Ollie Martin as its predicted bronze medalist, which would be interesting for sure, due to a combination of trick potential and rise in performance. So yeah, there's ChatGPT. It has, actually, I went a step further this week. I went for possible surprise medalists, which I don't think are that big surprises, to be honest. But in the men's side of things, the surprise medalist has got Red Gerard, who obviously won gold in Pyeongchang and just missed out on the podium in Beijing. It's got Marcus Cleveland, Jake Cantor, and Valentino Guzzelli, because he's posted top 5 slopestyle finishes. Huge amplitude could wow the judges, according to ChatGPT, which I feel like is more prominent in the halfpipe than slope, but we'll let AI off the hook on that one. And then women's possible surprise medalists has got Mia, Annika, and Mary. So again, I wouldn't say too much of a surprise. I thought surprise medalist, it might bring out someone, like Noah Victor, in the way that AI might do it as a bit of an unknown. But yeah, we haven't really got a guest prediction this week. I know last time we heard out from Ian Findlay. We did ask one of our judges, Kim Eldvik, or Dagan as he's currently known, or more commonly known, but he didn't want to commit to a full men's podium. He just listed nations, which seemed like a bit of a cop-out, to be honest. But he had the same prediction for women's the women's podium as ChatGPT. So maybe ChatGPT is onto something. But there we go. That is a wrap on episode 3. It was pretty good to go through the slopestyle season again. Quite nice looking back and giving a bit of a review. And of course, next episode, we're going to go into the halfpipe side of things, which I can already see you getting more and more excited about.
Yeah, excited, nervous. I love pipe, but there's no secrets around at the moment that it's going to be a tough year in the pipe. I think, when they're all on, they're on in that one. So it's exciting. And I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. So we'll be back very shortly with episode 4. And then I think we'll go into the World Champs kind of review, because we haven't touched on World Champs just because it was a bit of a special event. So we'll do its own little podcast episode for the World Championships. But any final points to add, Beggsy? Or happy with everything we've covered?
Happy with everything we covered. Looking forward to pipe.
Sick. So if you're enjoying the podcast, give us a bit of a thumbs up rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, wherever you listen to it. Give us a follow on Instagram. We are at On The Knuckle. And if you've got any questions, thoughts, comments, etc., if you want to add your own Olympic predictions in, then feel free to ping it through in the DMs to On The Knuckle, and we'll pick them up. We'll read out a few of our favorites. And we'll be back very shortly for episode 4. But for now, that's all from me. It's Gaz Vestman-Vogan, and from my wonderful co-host from Australia, Mr. Adam Begg. And subscribe, stay tuned, tell your mates, tell your friends, tell your mum, and we'll be back with episode 4.
Catch up.
Catch you on the flip side.